Yes.
When you said, and I will, I ran and quickly turned on the recording. So here we are with the recording. It's good that you know where my challenges are. Okay, we shall begin. Dear students, dear KM colleagues, good day to you all. We are today we ended last week the session of suppliers and all kinds of business case study stories. And we now know what AI is. Great. We now know how AI can help KM classical projects, KM classical activities. Some of them we saw and were demonstrated, like visualization or search. Some of them we only spoke about, but we didn't demonstrate, like locating experts, subject matter experts. But AI can assist in many of the manual roles that KMers have dealt with in the past.
Maria, sorry, could you please do the mass mute?
I'll mute everyone, just a moment, please.
Thank you.
So we ended these two big parts of this course, also giving an introduction to AI and also explaining and demonstrating how AI can help us as KMers in different types of roles and jobs and tasks that we are providing day after day. Now, all what we showed and demonstrated, you can find outside, and you probably didn't need this course, but this course brings it all together, integrating it. It's the first time that there's a course that's integrating it all, but pieces here and there, you probably could have found out on the internet or in lectures here and there. What we are starting today is an innovational part of this course. It's not only integrating how AI can help knowledge management, but now today we are starting the most important part, in my opinion at least, of this course. And the objective is to show, and this is the first time in the world that we know that such thing is spoken about, to show how KMers can have a special role in assisting any AI project that is around there in your organizations. It is very important because they don't think that they need us. They think that they're doing it well, and where they don't do it well, they say, okay, we'll bring more data analysts, more IT people, more algorithmic papers, more statisticians. They don't think, they don't wire the notion that KMers have an asset that can help these projects succeed. So it's not that easy to open the door and say, hey, we are here and we have experience and knowledge and expertise that can make your or our projects better. So what we're going to do in the coming sessions is piece after piece show typical roles in an AI project, typical tasks where we think that KMers have an added value, not only because they are people, not only because they know the organization, but because they have the hat because they have the role of a KMO. So 2 more things to understand. A, it's not perfect yet. We are now telling you what we saw, what we experienced, what we know, but this still is, it's like door. It can yet change. It has to be yet refined. And together, I believe that we can make our suggestions even better. So don't hesitate to ask. Don't hesitate to share your experiences. Don't hesitate after things are spoke in class to try them out and come back to us a week later, a month later, after this course is ended and say, yeah, I experienced this. It really works, or it should be a bit differently. So because we don't have the real answers, because we're doing it for only a short period of time. B, you will find that many of these issues are familiar to you. Because today, for example, we were going to speak about smart content management. I believe that any one and one of you have already experienced and can shout and can even give lectures on content management. Yet, A, we want you to listen carefully because we are going to speak in content management. First of all, we're speaking about it because it's a KM expertise. That's why we think it's important for AI projects, that we can give the added value because it's important. So A, we're going to speak about things that are familiar with you. B, be very cautious because we're going to give the refinements as we understand them in AI projects, as they are considered in AI projects. There's even today a slide of Annie stating, see the language, observe the language, be aware of the language, because AIs not always have exactly the same language as we have. So on one hand, it's things that we are familiar with, but on the other hand, it's things that AIs speak about, and we are starting to do to make this integration. And some places it will go fast, and some places it will be, a bit unflexible, and we will have to think together. So in other words, we are together in a new journey that was never exposed before. So welcome all. And today I welcome Annie, that she will start speaking about content management. Last note before I let Annie speak, we again are going to have missions to read, not missions, we will have tasks to read before every course. So I didn't remember to send it short, it was a very short notice, and I don't think that many of you remembered to be prepared today. So those who could read it before we started today, great. But please, we will send you materials for next week and for the week later. You all have them on the syllabus that we sent you at the beginning. We are starting to work again. Demonstrations, fun over, work is here, but a new era is beginning. KMOs are joining AI. Annie, you may please start.
Okay, had to unmute. Thank you and welcome back everyone. And we're going to go back into the lecture series, which hopefully we'll still be able to tie back to all of the information that we've heard in the previous two. I'm going to be sharing my. Okay. Okay. So we are coming to a point where we're looking at how it all kind of fits together, like what Maury was saying. Again, I emphasize that artificial intelligence and knowledge management are not mutually exclusive. It's sad that we don't have a common language so that we can see where the integration points meet. But I think this will give you some insight into the complexity of where we're headed now, especially with content, and how we actually get that content for the old statement of knowledge management, of getting the right information to the right people so that they can make the right decision. This was the pre-class assignment reading. It just basically gives strategies to go from enterprise content management to content services, which is a shift that we're making because there are so many variations of content now that we need to actually look at it more as what do we actually need as opposed to just having content. Our agenda today, I'm going to talk through enterprise content and then look at it from a service platform view, and then also just talk about the systems today and how we work with it in the process that we go through in order to establish our content. And then I'm going to look at integration of the digital components of it. So we think that it's just a little bit until we start adding them up. I put the periodic table of contents up there just because that has an excessive amount of content. And sometimes, there are different wording that apply. So we need to be cognizant that sometimes we have many that represent the same thing. And we need to know, like with the thesaurus, that there are different views of different words. But as you look at this, even you'll see that there's quite a bit that we need to know and where it is, how it's laid out, where it's structured. And the key to a lot of this is the data that's going into it. So we need to be cognizant of the content because the data may have sensitive data and we have privacy and security issues. So structure is quite important when we start talking about content, enterprise content. So just to look at some of these, today we have audio and podcasts. We have decisions because decisions are actually knowledge base and we need to know where those decisions are stored. We can't go back to the past when we would actually make decisions and no one captured them. We are very cognizant now that these decisions need to be kept so that we can leverage them in the future. We look at things like the mobile apps and what we're actually storing out on mobile apps. And this brings up a question too, because when you start distributing out content, and you begin to wonder which one is the authoritative record, which one actually has the true information on it. And we jump into an area again of even records. I think with the artificial intelligence, we tend to get away from records as well. And we forget that records are electronic as well as paper. So we have all these different types of records again, and we seem to have buried records management in the sand, the head's in the sand now. We need to bring that back up. And also an intelligence, which is something that I see that's missing in a lot of our methodologies. Again, the old adage of the data, information, knowledge, and then wisdom. We tend to forget about intelligence. When we're doing these algorithms are actually intelligence that we need to capture and be able to leverage and reuse and be able to bring them into a point where they are knowledge. We look at all the digital assets that we have out there. And then of course we got to look at search and understand the different search features and, optimization of them because we tend to have to find things in a very quick manner. We got templates and then of course the web content. So you have all of these different varieties of content and we need to totally be aware of them and understand how each of them fit into our structure. So when we talk about enterprise content management now, you see this big circle where we have this big collection of content, and then the other part is who does it go to and how do they get it? Or if there's identity access management, what structures do we ensure that this content falls into the right hands and that it is used appropriately within an organization, which kind of takes you even back to the ethics of it and also how it's being developed. So we got this designated audience that we need to take into consideration. And then here's the other part of complexity. It's not just a single technology. As you've been seeing, there are a lot of technologies and there are touch points throughout the entire enterprise. So we need to have a structure that makes us aware of that as well. And then you also have these dynamic combinations. One of the biggest issues out there is integration right now. And you see so many integrated tools, and they even have an integrated platform as a service type of technology now, so that we can pick and choose what works for us. The one thing that I think most people are realizing, even with content management, is that there's no one size that fits all. And we actually should be cognizant of that, because what makes us different is the way we actually operate and how we actually manage our content out to our people. It's sticking up on me again. Why does it do this? Okay, there it is. So with that content management, currently what we have is we're looking at content, I'm gonna make certain I'm on the right, yeah. We're looking at content services. So services help us to break things down so that they're in a more, I don't want to say primitive state, but I want to say a more contextual state, so that we can actually understand what it is we are asking for, because then it's a service. If I need intelligence, then I should be able to go and get intelligence and pick it from a service. If I need actionable data, then I should be able to go there. If I need podcasts, I should be able to go to podcasts for knowledge on a specific topic. So the way we store content is critical to how we retrieve it, and also how we share it as well and collaborate with it. So one of the things that we do is all of this data, when content, we're transforming it into a view that actually helps us to work better with it. And also it thinks for us, because we need to be able to, again, retrieve things very quickly. So we need to be cognizant of exactly what we want, how we want it, and when we want it. And that also takes us to a point where we have to have, and we'll talk about a little bit later, a common language. Or even if we don't have a common language, we must duplicate the way we have worked, well, our basic English. We know that everyone speaks differently. So we have a thesaurus, so we have synonyms, we have antonyms, we have different ways. So our structure needs to be based on the way we think or have been taught to think when we're looking at an English type of structure. We integrate, again, multiple systems across this, internal and external. So therefore, we need to have these services that you can pull and choose from. Now, this is not something that's new either, because in most cases, when you did systems engineering before they changed the term to architecting, it used to be that you would make certain that things were they were cohesive and that they worked together. And so you made them, what is it, loosely coupled and tightly cohesive. So you made certain that they worked independently, but they were able also to work together. And that was one of the top ways of putting structure into place, which I think we have kind of lost sight of.
Annie, there's people are asking, Manoj is asking if, as to slide number 5, it looks a bit complicated. May you say that slide number 6 gives the main bottom lines of slide number 5 of the main tasks?
Yeah, it does. It takes it from what we now have as enterprise management into enterprise services. So you're right. What slide 5 is, slide 5 is, let me go back to it for a second. Slide 5 shows you the complexity of it, because in each of these areas, you have content that must be managed. And some of this content overlays each other. And that's why I was saying that sometimes with the data, you need to know where the authoritative source is, or your source of record, or your data of record is. Because what you're doing is you're actually propagating data throughout your enterprise. And you must track that, because when you get to privacy and confidentiality, then you must know that it is the same data. But when you use it, you must know that you're actually using the authoritative or the validated source of it that is accurate. A lot of times what happens, even within the enterprise now, is that people pull information and they put it in Excel spreadsheets and they store it at their desk. And so in the future, they continue to use that Excel spreadsheet, even though the value of what they've captured have changed. And so therefore, we are actually receiving within our reporting systems data that is not valid and data that might be obsolete or incorrect. So when you look at this, you know, when I have images, my images are usually, like we look at visualization, my images are usually pulled from my internal data. And if they're like a scorecard or a dashboard, they're created using that data. So I need to actually be able to track the content or the components of that particular data to that image, and then be able to manage that image and be able to also have it annotated in some way that somebody knows what the purpose and also what the content of it is. You know, the same thing with documents. You may have a document that actually relates to that particular image. And so you must also, again, trace that document and have, and I want to say it's sort of like you got to incorporate the data lineage into your structure so that you can ensure as you're moving forward that with your content that you also understand the source of where the information is coming from. So you're absolutely right. This is a very complex diagram. It looks simple, but when you put everything into it, you're going to see so many crossovers, so many integrations, so much as a spider web, almost like a neural network, so to speak. Did that answer the question? Or
Manoj, I believe it does.
okay, great. So when we talk about content systems today, and we look at enterprise content management, which is the term, and then we look at content services, you know, because these terms pop up, and a lot of times we are trying to figure out, you know, why are they changing? What is the difference between them? And what happens is we're growing. I mean, we're cloud-based now, so things are not always on-prem. So, you know, when you do cloud-based, you have just opened yourself up to a lot of other intrusions that you must take into consideration: privacy, confidentiality, and security. We have, when you're on-prem, a lot of times, there's really no API or application programming interface. Those exist, but you have to have resources that can create them and that are totally familiar with your structure. Whereas with content services, because it's more of a service, the organizations that are developing the applications have it API driven. So they actually have a better view of how their APIs work. And the problem is, though, that we don't have possibly the data architecture to support that's going into their applications as APIs. There's outdated user interfaces, and with content services, you know, because again, some of them are cloud-based, web-based, you got a lot better user-friendly interfaces, and they are generally put there through third parties, you know, because we're pulling these services together. Do not use ECM does not use AI to automate processes, and there's your key, AI. But see, when you do content services, it does, because the workflow and the collaboration and all of that has the rules written behind it. And I want to point back to that particular slide that was on number 5 again, because I introduced something else. You now have rules that are behind your flow and your operations and how things are working. And that's another content that must be managed, because this again gets you back to the ethics of things. Because if you don't understand the rules that are being put in place within your organization, then you also open yourself up to liability, to disparities, and also ethical breaches. So those are things that we need to think about, because these rules tell it what to do, and the parameters in those rules can kind of negate the culture or the values of the organization and drive them by an individual. So we have, when we look at these, and I've emphasized, you know, some of the areas, but there's regulatory compliance and risk management that must come into play when you're dealing with content. You know, and then again, when I talked about records management, we have retention and dissemination of, you know, the intelligence and knowledge. You don't want to keep everything for forever. You know, eventually you need to, just like with our medical records, we need to think about it and think about the regulations. You know, I think dental records are kept for 3 years, and then some medical are kept for 7 years. What happens after the 4th year if something happens to your mouth that you were guaranteed 10 years that it would be, that you had a 10-year lifespan for it? So we need to think about retention and dissemination. Do I want to keep decisions that were made 15 years ago, or you know what, have they grown now and been changed and adjusted, so I should have updated them and eliminated the old ones? Those are things we need to think about. Cost and process efficiencies. I think this is an area that we definitely need to be cognizant of. One of the things I'm seeing even with the services is that cost is rising, and then process efficiency, I think that we're actually taking a negative hit there, because a lot of times, like I said, we're not understanding the integration between these tools and the internal systems that we already have in place. We got to identify, and this is where we get back into a lot of this augmentation to innovation and new ways of work. Because we're doing these automations and we're bringing in AI as part of the workflow, we need to step outside and look at how we augment this with human. They don't go away. There's still things that need to be done by humans that we need to be clear about, and we need to make certain that they're better at doing those things than the computer, because that is where I think a lot of our cost and our process inefficiencies fall.
May I add
Mhm.
that these are the places where KMers have added values in content management augmentation, comparing to regular AIs. And when I
Absolutely.
speak with AIs, they say, are you ridiculous? We have to feel the data. We are not going to give you the data to organize and content manage it.
Absolutely.
So it's a journey. And remember, we have what to say. We have a great added value. We're not just playing around with the content.
Absolutely. This thing keeps sticking on me every now and then. It seems like when I stop talking, it says we're going to keep you here. So that's, you keep hearing me saying services and microservices. And again, like I said, I don't know that it has to go to the primitive level, but I do know that it has to go below the macro level. We need to start being able to understand the internals of these services that we are developing around, our different business capabilities. And there's that. Again, they have to be maintainable and testable, and there's my word, loosely coupled and independently deployed. And I want to be kind of clear on that and maybe give slight example of how we need to think about how one thing impacts the other. I know with technology, there was a time where they integrated the TV and I think the DVD players and all of that. You don't see that as much anymore, because when one component failed, they all failed. And that's the same thing that could happen here. You want to make certain that they're loosely coupled, so that it will still execute when one component fails, but that one component can be maintained and put back into service fairly quickly if we're aware of how it is structured. So this kind of, and I'll just go through these a little bit because it kind of gives what I'm saying. The system is divided into several smaller independent units, and they're actually aligned with business capabilities. So that business capability tells us that we need to have a certain language that we can talk so that we understand what each of those capabilities are. It is more flexible, robust, and it is complete. Each service is thought about from input, process, and output so that we clearly understand what is going on. And again, it's autonomous because they have to work independently. We do not want them to be so tightly coupled that when one thing breaks, everything breaks. We got to use these application program interfaces, which are very important right now. And basically, these program interfaces, and I think, again, it's terminology, they're basically scripts. They go up against the data and they write particular logic against it. And we need to have people who understand that. I think when we went to object-oriented programming, we tended to get away from understanding what was internal to what we were doing. In other words, I'm going to jump down to what was encapsulated in the container that we were talking about. And I think that we need to, unfortunately, I think most people want to stay at the high level, the macro level, and say, just tell me this, but we have got to move down more into the micro level so that we can begin understanding what it is. We cannot keep saying we want things so quick that we don't take the time to understand what it is we're doing. And the containers, which holds these services, are going to be very popular. They're coming up now. So we have now the words, the language, we have the context, we have the concepts, and we have to have the business capabilities, and then we have containers, and containers help us to put things into different perspectives so we can find them. Just saying that these services, they have to be laid out through some type of architecture, and now we go right back into the content, because once again, we do the rules, we also have to understand the services, and we have to have dictionaries, and we have to have definitions of this information so that we or anyone who walks into that particular environment can understand its purpose and its use. And then, this kind of oxymoron, because if you need to understand the purpose and the use, then we're giving them knowledge. So again, another key point, if we're going to have these content services and we're going to have this structure set up, KMers are absolutely necessary, because they are the knowledge officers who understand where those touch points are. And we have to be cognizant too. This is one of the things that you see going around, is these advanced technologies. We got the Internet of Things, and that's a big neural network in and of itself that needs to be understood. Cloud, and how does that fit into the dynamics of how we're serving our content external to the organization? And better yet, even if we're not, how we're having intrusion into our internal runnings through the cloud. Blockchain. And interesting enough, I've been really looking into blockchain. I've taken a couple of courses on it, because I was kind of, well, how does this truly work? And one of the things that took me back to was like object-oriented, when you had the level of abstraction. Again, you had the container, the concept, and then you also had the encapsulation of all of the logic that went with that particular component or service. And blockchain, from what I've been looking at, even some of the use cases, I was really interested in the farming one, where it allows, that eliminates the middleman, and you can actually get better products or produce, because it actually tracks the sales and I guess the delivery of produce and the quality of them. So what happens is some of the smaller farmers can actually get in, because it's kind of independent. So this was kind of interesting, and I'm trying to see how, except for in finance, how we apply it into business. So I have to say that's an area that I'm working strongly on right now, and I just got to get my mind wrapped around it. But it seems to be something that's going to be really it's going to be a new kid on the block, and it's going to be really good. Cybersecurity, and sorry, the R is missing. This is an area with technology that, again, if you don't have your content services laid out, then how do you know you're protecting what you're supposed to be protecting? And every individual needs to be concerned about this, because again, privacy and confidentiality. Even when you look at, and I've written an article, and it's no secret on the article, but you look at Einstein, which is OPM cybersecurity tool, AI tool. And last I looked at it, it could not recognize 94% of basic intrusions into OPM. And you have seen so many breaches. And again, this is based on content. So you get the cybersecurity where someone can get in and get your content. And it not only affects the organization, but it affects the individuals that compose the organization. Artificial intelligence. Those technologies, when we're using them, again, they lay out the rules for our content, sometimes what is within it, and also what is outside of it, what is internal to the organization, what is external, because this leverages some of those other technologies like cloud and blockchain. So we need to be, again, fully aware of how we're laying out our intelligence. Again, that new layer that I put into and eliminated the pyramid paradigm. You know, we got data, we got information, and then we have intelligence before we actually get to knowledge. And then at the top, we have cognition, which is total awareness. Mobile devices, what are we, are we actually moving data out to mobile devices, or are we keeping them out in the cloud? How are we actually executing that? And then even with robotics as well, we're teaching robotics how to convey information or to run things. You look at GPSs, you've seen when sometimes they break down, and those are points that we need to be knowledgeable about, especially if you're a transportation system. You want to make certain that your GPS systems are top notch and that your robots understand how to get around or navigate around the quickest paths, which was one of the algorithms that we talked about earlier as well. And then edge computing, when we send things out, sometimes it takes much longer. So edge computing is providing the computing right at the source. We need to think about doing some of that hardcore chopping down of analytics and stuff at the core, and then be able to take it out. But again, we need to look at the structure and how we're doing that. So we do it at the edge, and then we transport things. Now, so all of these new technologies also fit in there. So we've just now put another layer of complexity over our content and our data, and how we actually need to manage it in order to get knowledge out to people. So once again, this supports that AI and KM are not mutually exclusive, but that KM cannot be eliminated from the mix, because we are critical to the delivery. So let's talk about the content life cycle for a little bit. When we bring content in, we look at it, we got to capture and ingest that content, and then we need to manage it, which is something that, we always think about. But the capture and ingest is extremely important too, because that's where you engineer and structure the background of it so that then you can manage the components. This is almost like what I've always said about knowledge management, which is something that I wanted to see change, is that when we came out with knowledge management, it was so interesting to me, because my first question was, how do you manage what you have not engineered? And so when we did studies against it, we always saw that, what we were trying to manage what was not defined already. So this content engineering, these services, all of those need to be architected before you can actually have effective management. And then we run the process of how we operate and how we do things in store, and then preserve, which is again retention and dissemination, and then how do you deliver. So let's talk about some multi-channel physical and electronic types of transfers of this. So we capture, we're looking at, as I've been talking, all kinds of sources. So we need to have the resources that understand that these sources need to be tracked. I look at one organization, and they have an architectural review standards board. And so anything that comes into the organization or is developed in the organization must be registered. But when you go to the site, there is no list of any source or no list of any database within the organization. So therefore, the process has not been established. So that's going to break down later on. Automatic content classification. When you bring content in, and this is even at the data level, you should actually classify it. Classify it as public knowledge so that you know that it won't hurt the organization, or then classify it as sensitive or extremely sensitive, or whatever classifications you need so that you can handle that data properly. We have to have, in certain cases, data extraction, but you got to have the rules to extract the data. You can't just go out there and extract anything without knowing how it is intended use or who has the authority to use it. Data validation, something that we need to also have in place to make certain that it is the right data, that it has been validated and it has a stamp of approval that this is the data that you should be used, which again is the integrity of it and making certain that we have good quality. In a lot of cases with content, we want to automatically create, again, rule-based. When it's automatic, you have to have the rules to say how it's going to be created. And we all know this part, multiple formats. Now, and being even careful with this, I know of a organization, and I won't call names, but when we were doing ingestion of data into systems, their main source was that they could use all different types of applications, all different types of software, all different. And unfortunately, when we start to load up, we found out that they did not have the latest versions. So the versions didn't match, and that caused serious problems. And then there were quite a few that did not allow the use of the different formats. So when organizations or vendors say that they do multi-sources, check on it before you actually bring them in, because that means if you have, if you have like a BI tool and you have software applications or information systems, have a list of all of those so that you can say, okay, these are the systems that we have. These are the, this is the system that we have. This is the version of this system. This is when we plan to update it so that we're prepared for the update. And you have to have that information available in order to be able to be successful. One of the reasons, I think I said again, that Watson, when it went in oncology, did not succeed was because their electronic record system was updated during the development of Watson within the system. And so when they finally got to the point, there was a mixed match between the electronic record system, which was extremely important to the success of Watson. And so they had to discontinue that development. And that was, I think, $6 million later. Leverage naming conventions. Here's where KMers come into play again. Taxonomies, ontologies, glossaries, definitions. This is all knowledge or information that people need to know that builds into knowledge. So when we have all of that put together and we start looking at the system, we want to organize, manage, and optimize. We want to make certain that that content is found and used by the authorized source or person. So we still have a lot of things to be put into place. And a lot of times, again, people jump directly into managing before they get into engineering. So what they look at is they say, okay, we need policies, procedures, and we need, these step-by-step rules, and we need processes. And the key here is you need all of those things, but they must be aligned with what is already in place. If they're not, then they become shelfware. So I've seen in organizations where they write this and it stays on the shelf and it doesn't get touched for the next 15 years, but they can check off the box, okay? So when you're doing this, you must look at the practice of what's happening as well as what you, the theory of what you think should be happening. So when we're managing this content, we've got to have, the structure in place. We've got to be able to find things. We've got to be able to operate effectively. And that's going to take quite a bit of resources to put that into place. Now, in most cases with these types of projects in engineering, and even when you do it, usually when you're starting out, you ramp up with quite a few resources, but then you plan so that you narrow down once you get these things in place, because creating them takes a lot more than maintaining them. Let's see the process and content. We got all of this process, and how do we do this? We got analytics. And this is kind of interesting because even our latest enterprise architecture methodologies, if you go out to look at all of them, they basically have no mention of the level of intelligence, there's always information, there's process, there's data, but you don't see a reference to intelligence, which is what we're basically driving our analytics off of, because we're building networks with that information so that we can then do some of this forecasting and do some of the, look back. So one of the things that we need to understand is that when we get into knowledge management, it is not necessarily our operations, it is what supersedes our operations, because we're pulling the data or pulling the intelligence that we need in order to make better decisions. So it becomes a business process in and of itself. And then we have the automated tasks that we need to put into place when we're processing content, because certainly it is so complex and it's so all over the place. We need to be able to move this data along. We want to streamline integration, and then we want to make certain, I know even as being a doctoral candidate, one of the things that you would always emphasize is that you always give credit to everyone who is part of an initiative. So you got this co-authoring, and you want to make certain that you don't leave people out when you do content, because then you also lose expertise. And not only do you lose expertise, you actually lose track of where you can go to get answers. Notifications, cases, now we're going with a lot of cases. So we have these business cases, use cases, case studies, and we can actually set those up so that we can actually, with content, go directly to this concept or this container and see what is included in it. Compliance, I've talked about that. And then search and find. One of the things that we tend to forget about, we always say we're going to do a search, but you have to think of that possibility that someone really doesn't understand the language of what they're looking for, but they kind of understand, what, when they see it, they can actually find it. So not only do we need to identify different types of search criteria, we also need to identify different types of navigation criteria. How do I navigate to something? And, also things may break, a search may not work. So how do I navigate to the information or knowledge that I need so that I don't necessarily have a shutdown? And again, studies have been done, and this is the thing about with content and finding things. They have found that usually it takes people 20% of their week searching for information that sometimes they never find. That's a big dent in our resources and the cost of our resources. And think about adding 20% of productivity back to someone's week and see how much more production you can get out of them. So as I was talking earlier, we talk about store, so it puts it right back into store in context. And, we organize in the structure. So there's metadata, and again, there's words and language, and then there's domains, business domains, as well as data domains. So you have to think about the context of your domains as well. And, what is the appropriate home for certain content so that you can find in the way they structure it. Again, we need that common business language. I'm sorry, that's outside my door. My neighbor has a dog that's chatty. And again, we want to look at how to be able to navigate. And I once again just emphasize multiple formats and being aware of the formats that you need to bring forward when you're bringing vendors in or when you're bringing people in to be able to set these structures up for you. Let's look at preserve, archive, and protect for the future. When do we get rid of data? How long do we have to keep it back? When will we actually need it? I know in some cases, we never know until sometimes much later that we need data. And again, like I said, we look at things like health and dental, and even I'm just so many. I can't call out all of them right now, but just so many. Even when you're looking at like NASA or building things, you sometimes don't use something every year, but then 10 years later, you realize, you know what, we tried that before, and this is how we actually operated, and we had success in these areas, and these are the areas that needed improvement, and you still have that somewhere digitized that you can use. I think in paper form, it might be a little difficult, but because we're in the era of electronics, it will be a lot easier. So when we preserve content, we actually, some of it is regulated, retention is regulated by NAR sometimes, and also by state governments. And we also, including destruction, sometimes you're not, based on compliance with laws and regulations, you cannot destroy data. So this is another reason why we need to have the structure in place that allows us to see that. And also disposition, where do you put it? Disposition, where does it go? Schedules, we have to have schedules to know when to do things, when we have surpassed compliances, when we know that retention periods are up. And then also declarations, have those declarations in place that say what has been done. So the right content to the right audience at the right time. I know you've heard that over and over and over again. You know, and when you're looking at this content delivery network, you have so many servers. You know, some of them are virtual because you do, when you get into the cloud, they're virtual. And sometimes even with those organizations, you need to know, again, the disposition, where is that located at? You need to still have the backups and the recoveries, and you still have to have the files. And here's the interesting thing. A lot of our stuff still, a lot of our previous, I'm going to say tasks and things we used to do still fall into play. You know, I used to say to people when they would say, oh, it takes too much, you know, you want to put this naming convention on this file. And you know, it doesn't make sense. It's like 15 characters long. And why would I have to do that? You know what? Because the logic is built into the file. And if you understand the logic, then you can see the content of the file before you even open the file. And so I used to ask them, I said, well, what do you do with it? And they said, well, I said, do you not name it? You just let it, you know, how do you put it in? They said, well, yeah, I have to name it. I said, so how much more time would it take for you to actually put logic into the name? And then I said, after you name it, what do you do with it? And they said, well, I just save it. And I said, so a few more minutes to navigate to a particular position where it should be, so that if you have to find it again or navigate it to it, is not worth it. So you'd rather put it someplace and spend 2 days or 2 weeks looking for it, rather than to be able to navigate and put it into a structure where if you have to go back to it, then you can go back to it fairly easy. Now, you know, starting out, that would make it might be a little difficult, or it might not, you might think it's a little tedious, but in the long run, you would find it very valuable because it would save you time in the find and search. So we need to, again, this architecture is very important, and I keep emphasizing that because we need to have a cradle to grave view of not only the data, but the information, the intelligence when we're building the rules, and the decisions that we're pulling out of knowledge. And then on the back end, again, we need to manage it. Hello? Hello? On the back end, we need, okay, we need to manage that so that, you know, we know how to retain, destroy, and, you know, and declare it, okay? So when we look at this delivery too, we saw some areas where we did visualization. We do reporting, you know, dashboards. Now, the interesting thing is, and we must also be careful of even our delivery mechanisms, because it tells the story of the organization. It gives out information that might need to not be shared. So if we have scorecards and dashboards that go to our executives, and we do not structure them such that the audience is identified that they're intended for, what happens if they get out to someone else's view, like one of your clients or one of your competitors? Then that puts you at a great risk. So again, when we deal with delivery of content, we also introduce, again, the risk management piece, and we must make certain that we are tracking and routing this, again, from the cradle to the grave, so that we can actually have total visibility into how we are structuring, how we are naming, how we are organizing, where we're placing not only the data, the intelligence, but we also need to make certain that we understand the concepts and that we understand the domains. All of this needs to be very much structured so that we can read it without being confused by it. So it needs to be, as I've put earlier, in a business language, and a business language that is taught not only to executives, but to the resources within an organization. and I don't and much on this one, but I've talked through this so many times, the security, compliance, and privacy protection, which is something that's on the board today. You know, the World Economic Forum, that's one of their main issues with knowledge management and artificial intelligence, of making certain of privacy protection and ethical reasons why we need to actually have policies and procedures around this. This is kind of interesting because there was no standard and consistent methodology for KM, and there still isn't. And I know I've been in this field for at least 20 years, and we've tried several times to get those in place. I've worked on task force with OPM, and now we're coming into AI. And once again, we don't have a standard and consistent methodology or framework to follow. You know, when we did, these are lessons learned. Project management, kind of the same problem, but they had the PMI. But even with a standard framework and methodology to follow, we still have projects coming in late and over budget because we have not mastered the use of those methodologies and frameworks. Same thing with system engineering, which could really help a lot. We have the CMM, and yet still again, in most cases, we want to circumvent most of the tasks and just move forward. So we tend to say we don't need those things anymore. But I'm here to say that I think in rebuilding our structures, we need to start back. And this is just my view. I don't think we need to start. We need to start back at ground one, and we need to actually do dual structures of our architectures. We need to do a top-down and a bottom-up approach of those low-hanging fruit that we can get into place that keeps it running, or the operations running, and a top-down so that we have our policies, procedures, and processes defined, and all of our structures laid out so that we know that we're working from a good map. And I think then we'll start to see where we don't find those breaches in security, compliance, and privacy. And also we'll be able to identify areas of deficiencies in protection. So let's integrate all of these digital components, all of these things that we're talking about that we need. So we need to know the language. You hear all of these all the time. How do we discuss them? I'm going to go through them. So we got analytics, we got automation. What does that mean? We got case. Is everybody on the same level about what a case is? We got the cloud. How many of us have really taken the time to understand the ramifications of using cloud? And also not even that, but whether cloud is a best fit, because sometimes on-prem still works, when you're talking about security. Collaboration, what about cross-function? We got so many stovepipes that we forget that, once again, this is integration. We got to work with others, and we need to use the same set of data. In most organizations, you'll probably find that data is duplicated tenfold, and it doesn't need to be. We just need to be able to have the structure and be able to provide the access to it, based on our identity and our roles within an organization. Extraction, what does that mean? What are we extracting? Where is it going? Governance. I hear so many people say, oh, we need governance, we need governance, we need governance. And, sometimes my point is, well, how are you going to govern what you don't even know yet and what you can't manage? Governing is managing, and you have to have the components to be able to manage it. So are you putting governance over analytics? Are you doing governance over automation? What are you putting governance over? And have you thought that through? Integration. We cannot work in organizations that are stovepipe. We use the same data, but for different purposes. Integration is a key component. And, some of my students, I have this thing, I said, I don't know why the world has not understood how you integrate. We have not integrated people well, we have not integrated systems well, and we have not integrated data well. And it's not that it's so complex, because we have some intelligent people and some skills that are phenomenal out there, but I'm just not sure of how we connect the head to the body in these organizations so that we leverage what we have. Metadata, that which explains itself. Migration, when we're going to a new system, let's be able to do a migration that's automated, that's much quicker. It shouldn't take long. Multi-channels of distribution, again, on-prem. Do we just get rid of on-prem and put everything in our companies in the cloud? And do we not understand that when you do that, you bring in an element of risk because you're now turning over your operations to those who are external to your organization? Preservation and protection, we've done taxonomy, critical. Taxonomies help us to have common language, and it is a KM facility. Bring people in and develop this language and train the people within your organization. Privacy, okay? I don't know about you, but I'm just concerned about that because I'm telling you, I try to stay off the grid sometimes because even with my phone, it is, privacy is gone. You make a move, and if they already have it linked and everybody knows you made that move and your new address is moved over to their phone, and there might be some people you didn't want to know your new address. Recognition, that's part of even AI, like I said, co-authoring and all of that. You want to recognize people for their contributions to your success. And we're right back to regulations and compliance, and then search and find. And biggest day, services and microservices, which help us to control the complexity of this by putting it into services that align with business activities that speak to a language that we all can understand. So putting that in, we need to understand this language. We need to step back for a second. And I think that we'll be successful. We got what we need. I mean, we definitely understand this. It's just integrating it and bringing it together so that we have a total framework and a methodology to follow. So here are a couple of more further learnings that you can look at. And I think I'm coming to an end of this. So let me see if there's any questions. And I ended right at 10. So we got about 15 minutes for questions.
Right. I suggest that people who had questions that were not unanswered yet, please raise your hand or just speak. Okay.
Is everybody just overwhelmed?
I think.
Hi, Annie.
Hi.
Hi, Arif.
Hi, Arif here from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Thank you, Annie, to be frank, this is the most comprehensive summary or in a way, in a nutshell, what knowledge managers need to do. The only challenge that I'm facing from my domain here is that in the organization, all of those parts has been broken to small bits and been spread out. And knowledge management seems to be coming either from a library perspective or coming from a perspective of records or other thing else. So I've been with a few organizations, some even toss their knowledge management into risk management. It's something that as knowledge managers, we need to bring this, kind of awareness up to the top management level, or what are the ways that we can actually do? Because at times I do feel like I'm running out of time because we are basically, aging, and the new teams are coming and they don't even seem to understand why is knowledge management needs to talk about analytics? Why are you talking about data? Actually, I've worked with both domain, data as well as the tacit part. But the challenge is, how do we bring people to that level of discussion? Thank you.
That's a very good question. And I think that somehow or another, we've got to bridge business with technology. Because see, we've tried to separate those two, and we don't recognize that they're not mutually exclusive, okay? And the key is we keep recreating these things because we came up with the business analyst, which was great. And that was the liaison to be able to talk to the business type and be able to talk to the tech type. But we don't really use that anymore. And we started making things, so misguided because we had two languages. And so things never got done. And I think for this, though, with content, we've got to kind of do some education series to bring people back to the reality that this is the content within your organization. And this, again, I go back to the digital twin. This represents your organization in a digital mode. So whatever's in your reality is also within here. So we must make certain that we operate digitally the same as we do physically. Okay. And I think when they start to realize that and they see the terms and they see how they apply to their work, I think then we'll start seeing things move forward. But you're absolutely correct in that there's been a divide. So those coming up behind us really don't understand because everything's been so chopped up. You know, with knowledge management, I remember when someone thought that a community of practice was knowledge management. And I'm like, no, there's a lot more to it. So until we bring that back together and kind of give the big picture of it, I just see us spiraling down a dark tool. I mean, a black hole. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Annie.
Mm-hmm.
Annie,
Mm-hmm.
I think that we want to emphasize that the heart of AI is machine learning, and one of the core components or elements or the main tasks in such a project is the classification, whether if we're speaking about unsupervised learning, where the machine tries to learn, but we have to provide the right taxonomy, or where we speak about supervised learning, and there we are those who provide not only the taxonomy, but also the connections, the tagging. Now,
Yes.
smart content management is a lot of things, and in the heart of an AI project, the biggest challenge that is in the core of this project is optimal classification. And here, guys, we are the kings and the queens.
Yeah, you're right. The taxonomy, the ontology, which is all the language, and I agree. And KM puts that together, but we still have to bridge that business language with that technical language, and that seems to be the hardest thing for people to do.
Let me make a quick comment on that. There is a vast treasure trove of talent out there, and they're called the old corporate librarians. If you want somebody who is very adept at absorbing all the different content that's coming across.
Absolutely.
We've been trying for the longest time to get KM and the Special Libraries Association to work together. We've been making a little bit of progress, but again, I just point that out that there's a lot of talent out there being untapped to help.
Absolutely. Great statement, Art. Yes. Yes.
I have a question. I have been in knowledge management for around 6 to 7 years by now, but something that I have struggled with everywhere is how do you demonstrate that knowledge management actually gives tangible benefits to the business? I mean, and what are those things that knowledge management, those things that are benefits of knowledge management to the business?
The benefits?
Knowledge management to the business or to the community you support?
I'm trying to think. There's so many benefits.
But
think about it. If you know something,
no, I understand. You can list out a number of benefits, but it's very difficult to establish that knowledge management is actually producing these benefits. So when you say people are learning, people turn around and say, well, I didn't use your document. I came to know the solution that's there in the document from this guy sitting next to me. That's the problem. Anything that you show, any data that you show, demonstrating value that knowledge management has delivered can be challenged. So is there
absolutely?
That's my question. Is there any universal benefit or set of benefits that knowledge management delivers, and that can be really shown through data?
To be honest with you, I can't answer that right now. And my gut feeling would be, I would say no. I think that there are things out there, but I'm not certain if they're validated. I think that knowledge management I've seen value from communities of practice now. I do know that. I once set up role-based communities of practice where you empower people to improve the way they work or improve their processes. And they came forward with corrections or improvements that the organization would not have known about if they had not put them together so they come through with it. And there was some value in that particular company was able to reduce 1.5 years off of their processing of their products. Now, and it was based on their key roles, 6 key roles within their communities of practice. So that's one that I can say. And I'm sure that there are others in a lot of other organizations that I can recall, but that I haven't kept up to date with right now. So I could get back to you on that one, but I just can't quickly recall it right now. But my big thing is, I think that based on cost and based on lack of resources, that we aren't seeing the true value of knowledge management. Because I'll give you an example, or not example, I'll make a statement about something in an organization. Knowledge actually, or intangible assets, actually account for 80% of the value within an organization. An organization creates an accounting department and has a chief financial officer, and they have an entire application that run that for 20% of the organization. When you transfer over to knowledge, and this is one of the reasons we don't have the true results, because I'm sure there is value add, but when you transfer to knowledge management, most organizations have maybe one person, which is a CKO, or they might have a knowledge management officer. And they might also have a few other people, but they have nowhere near what they do to support the financial accounting as they do to support the intangible assets, which is the knowledge portion. So my gut for, like I said, being able to say, do we have any information on that? I would say, yes, there's a lot of information, but do I think the information is accurate? I would say no, because I don't think that there's been the systems nor the resources to be able to produce that information.
Thank you, Dr. Finn. Yeah, that sort of answers my question.
Okay.
Great. I think that we're wrapping up. Annie, do you want to
Yes.
say a few words as a closure?
Yes, sort of. The thing is, we need the architectures for our data, our information, and our content. And it's interesting because all of this was to come under enterprise architecture. So it would have made our jobs a lot easier. So we need to kind of look back and see what our organizations have done in enterprise architecture. And I think that's the starting point for us in order to be successful. So we need to re-engage that particular activity, and we need to educate and come up with the language. And I think that we'll probably get back on track. It's going to take a little bit, but I do think we can be successful with this. That's my last words.
Thank you very much. And I have a good surprise for you all. I peeked into the syllabus and I saw that next week we are having a visitor. We're having a guest, Tani Rem, who maybe many of you are aware of. He's a thought leader, both in KM, but also in AI. So he's going to speak about the KM AI challenges of projects, of AI projects. So the good news is that there won't be no homework for next week. Meet you all then and have a great week. And one last thing, for those in the US that on the weekend are going to start celebrating the Independence Day, happy Independence Day from us all.
Thank you all, and it's good to be back.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I was reading some of the, I'm reading the chat. Wow, okay. Good to be back, Maury.
Yeah, good having us. Yes.
Yes, yes. So, but I am gonna touch with Tony to get a couple of his articles, because he's written a few articles, so that we can send them out prior, so anybody who's not familiar can read them. Okay.
Great. Okay. And yes, and we all the time are connecting the AI with the KM, how
Mhm.
we as KMers, that's going to be the mantra for the coming weeks. How
Yes,
we as
absolutely.
KMers
Mhm.
can advance AI projects.
Mhm.
People have to dare, and they're not there yet.
Right, absolutely. But
That's why we are innovators.
absolutely. And that's why we did this course.
Yes. Thank you, and have a nice
Okay.
weekend, and happy Independence Day to you too.
Thank you, and you too. You too. I was just trying to read. I can go out there and read them afterwards. Okay.
Yes.
Y'all have a great week.
You know what? I'll send it. I'm saving the chat now.
Okay.
So, and I'll wait 2 minutes before I close it.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.